Welcome to the Vale, where the paranormal is our playground. Um, we're on part 2 of Albert Fish.
Mhm. And we want to kind of jump in because this is going to be a little bit of an episode. There's a lot to cover. We do still have a part 3, but there's just a lot to cover.
Okay.
This guy is interesting. And the coolness is this guy next to me, Nick here,
Mm-hmm.
really doesn't know much about this guy. I've kind of kept this close and dear to the heart. So he's not going to be able to know too much until I say it. And I love seeing his reactions.
Mm-hmm.
I did read at least one letter from Albert Fish to Nick on the phone the other day. And we were like FaceTiming, and the face he made was interesting. So
Just play with my toy.
Yes.
Yeah, play with my toy.
As you know, we were unveiling last time we were here, and now Nick wants to play with his toy. The dragon tail.
My dragon.
And of course, we can't forget.
Okay.
We are still having our drink from Washington, D.C., the Ricky. So the gin, the tonic, and the lemon juice. So I'm going to steal this from...
Yep.
Okay. So as we remembered in episode 1, we ended with the death of Francis McDonald. And the number of people that were accused, people that kind of came in out of nowhere and was like, oh, I think this dude did it, and I think this other guy did it.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of that going on. And then we ended with the poor farmer who just happened to be in town when this was going down. And they ended up pulling him out and beating him, and he got into a gunfight. And and it really turned out that he was a farmer from Pennsylvania who just happened to be in the area. Now you're gonna see me mess with my hair because I cannot stand if my hair gets out of place. So what can I say? High maintenance girl, right?
Mm-hmm.
I am so not high maintenance, and you know it. All right, so listen, it's Friday. I worked all day. The pretty curl that I had in my hair earlier today just isn't there anymore.
You'll be all right.
Yeah, I know. And you've got Nick here with his cute hat on and his really loud shirt.
It's not loud.
It's bright green. But we kind of matched today. I mean, he's got the light green. I've got the dark green.
With my turtles? Turtle.
Yes, with your turtles.
Turtles.
Weirdo.
Turtle.
So again, this gentleman, this farmer from Pennsylvania was pulled out, accused of being Fish, really. And he ended up taking the gun and putting it to his head after screaming that he was just a farmer that was from Pennsylvania, got into a fight with his wife, and was just there sleeping. And that story checked out. He wasn't the killer of poor little Francis McDonald, who, by the way, I know we showed his picture in the last thing. He's so cute. He's so cute.
I don't have his picture queued up this time because
no, but he was so cute. They didn't have many pictures back then.
There were more drawings.
Right, there was drawings and stuff. So it's more of a pencil drawing of Francis, but he's definitely a cute boy, and it was a sad end to his life. So we're moving on now to Friday, February 11th of 1928. This was just 4 years after the McDonald killing. Okay. So another young boy by the name of Billy Gaffney was the next known victim of the Gray Man. Now, the Gray Man was the name that they came up with for Albert Fish because McDonald's mother had said that she saw what looked like a gray man to her, where he came up the streets, was fiddling with his hands, mumbling to himself, and he had like this gray suit on, and he just looked gray.
Right.
And then she saw him, and he tipped his hat to her and kept going. Which is scary because if you think about it, the killer of your child looked you dead in the eye, tipped his hat to you as in to say hi, and then took your kid.
Yep.
That's something she had to live with. That's devastating. So he was known as the Gray Man, as one of his many titles that he got called after a while. So the Gaffney family lived in a small apartment on the second floor of 99 15th Street in Brooklyn. It was a smaller, kind of run-down tenement housing, sort of like today's projects.
Okay.
So it was like the low income. Billy was young and a slender boy of just 4 years old, and he was playing in the hallway. So we're thinking of an apartment building.
Okay.
Kind of city dwelling type building.
Okay.
He was a young boy of 4 years old, and he was playing in the hallway with his neighbor, also Billy Beaton, 3 years old.
Oh.
So we have a 4 and 3 year old playing in the hallway of their apartments. Now it is known that Billy got a bike for Christmas.
Okay.
Excuse me. And he was riding his bike up and down the hallway. So this is February, so right after Christmas about.
Okay.
While the two boys played, another neighbor who was about 12 years old, it was Johnny McNiff, was kind of watching and playing with them. He was not in charge of babysitting the boys. He lived there, and he was actually in charge of babysitting his little sister.
Okay.
Who was sleeping in her crib at the time. So he just kind of stepped out of the apartment, saw the boys, decided to go play with them a little bit, watch them, hang out with them.
Okay.
So, nice kid.
Mm-hmm.
Just watching other people's kids for the heck of it, like you aren't paying him anything.
Right.
So while he is watching the two boys play, he heard his sister start crying in the crib, and he went to go tend to her. And he came back not more than just a few minutes later, and both Billies were gone. Now, Johnny saw Billy Beaton's father come out of his apartment right then, and he noticed Johnny looking very puzzled. When Mr. Beaton asked Johnny what was wrong, he explained that just a few minutes ago, both the Billies were playing right here, and now they're gone. Mr. Beaton and Johnny went right to the Gaffney apartment, thinking maybe the kids went into the other Billy's house and were playing inside.
Right.
Nobody was there. I mean, makes sense.
Yeah, that would be a logical assumption.
Yeah. They began to search the apartment building, kind of going in staircases, running up and down hallways. They were fearful that maybe the boys ventured outside. Now we're on the second floor of an apartment building, but they could have gone down the staircase and went outside.
Right.
So they ran outside to check and couldn't find them. They ran all the way to the top floor of the apartment, and there stood Billy Beaton standing by this ladder that led to the roof. Now, there was obviously a sigh of relief from Mr. Beaton, who kind of scooped him up in his arm and hugging him and saying, like, where did you go? And Billy had said that they were on the roof. And they saw many cool things like chimneys and buildings and steamships on the harbor. Mr. Beaton then noticed that the wooden hatch that leads to the roof that's above the ladder was moved, which was odd to him because all the tenants were good about keeping that hatch closed. And due to the weight of this hatch, there was no way a 3 or 4 year old could climb that ladder, then move it on their own.
Okay.
Because you're holding onto a ladder and you have to use one arm to kind of move the hatch.
Okay.
There was no way that was going to be able to be done by a 3 or 4 year old.
Right. I mean.
So he looked up and noticed the hatch was open.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, Mr. Beaton, as happy as he was to see his son, he was kind of like, all right, well, you guys were on the roof. You really shouldn't have been there. Where's the other Billy? And little Billy, in his innocent 3-year-old voice, without any hesitation whatsoever, said the boogeyman took him. And because this became from a 3-year-old, authorities really discounted this as an accurate statement because it would be 6 years before they figured out that Billy Beaton was right.
Wow.
So, I mean, if you're thinking about it, a 3-year-old goes, "Oh, I saw the boogeyman." You're right away kind of going,
Okay.
"Okay, kiddo,
Yeah.
yeah,
Sure.
all the kids know the boogeyman."
Hmm.
But it was definitely something that caught the attention of Mr. Beaton. Like, what do you mean the boogeyman took him?
Hmm.
So, and it was said so quickly and without hesitation.
Mhm.
It was
Just natural.
almost nonchalant, like, "Oh, the boogeyman took him." Like,
Hmm.
darn, lost my friend. 25 detectives and officers under the command of Sergeant Elmer Joseph were assigned to the search. Billy, the little one, 4-year-old, Mr. Beaton, and Johnny were all questioned over and over, but Billy's statements never changed. So Sergeant dismissed it again because he felt every child comes up with stories. Mr. Beaton, who was actually a truck driver, barely paid enough in living wages. The family was poor. They didn't own much. The sergeant couldn't, I shouldn't say Mr. Beaton, Mr. Gaffney.
Mm.
I typed it wrong. Anyway, Mr. Gaffney, a truck driver,
Okay.
wasn't getting paid a lot. The sergeant really couldn't reason that a child that has a family with not much money could be kidnapped. Now, if you didn't know, in the late 1920s and definitely in the early 1930s, kidnapping was huge.
Yeah.
It became a very common and scary thing. And a lot of it was due to the Depression era. We're getting into the Depression. There was like the Roaring 20s, and then things really started falling apart in the late 20s, and then definitely 1929, 1930.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people were actually so desperate that they were kidnapping children to hold for ransom.
Right. There's one that jumps to me is the Limburg case.
Yeah, which wasn't too long after this.
And something obviously went wrong.
Yeah.
But they
Right.
still did the ransom note. Yeah.
So it was honestly the assumption that Billy wandered out of the building on his own and got in some sort of trouble, like getting hurt or stuck in a neighboring warehouse, or possibly falling into the canal that was nearby. 2 officers spent a day drugging through the canal, only to come up with trash, but no Billy. The scene around the apartment at this time was the most massive hunt in New York City's history, with 350 police officers, an untold number of neighbors, schools, and businesses, and other children, including the Boy Scouts again. Remember in Francis' case, the Boy Scouts were out there, and they were actually the ones that found his body. They were checking sewers, lofts, warehouses, coal bins, lumber yards, crawl spaces, alleyways. They were looking everywhere for Billy. Billy just seemed to vanish, and no trace of him was found. Sadly, Miss Gaffney was so grief-stricken. She stayed in her apartment throughout the entire search, only eating and drinking when her 3 sisters came to her side and forced her to. She remained extremely firm in her conviction that Billy was alive and just lost somewhere. She stated to reporters, "He's always so pale, in the house so much. I can't bear to think how he looks now without food and all." And then came the trolls. Today we call them the internet trolls. Back then they were the letter trolls.
Okay.
The making of the internet trolls, I should say.
Yes.
So these people have always been around. So of course the internet trolls would always comment really crappy things when something bad would happen. A lot of internet trolls will be like, "Well, where were the parents and how come they weren't watching them?" and things like that.
Right.
Sadly, they were letter trolls, and the Gaffney family was starting to get a number of crank letters. One of the letters actually said, "Wait, do not appear too anxious. Your son is in safe hands. We fought for him, but I got him now. We will get the beaten boy for Billy to play with, for Billy's lonesome. Do not show this letter to anyone if you know it's good for you. Again, I say that Billy is safe and that we're experimenting on him." So
It's kind of messed up.
letters like that they were getting, it's terrible. You have this grieving family, cannot find their 3-year-old child, like 3 years old.
Right.
That's my granddaughter's age. Like, I just can't. I can't even like imagine that feeling. So the police did check every single letter that was sent, Crink's letter or not. They checked it all, hoping that one of them may have a clue, but none of them really ever checked out. So 3-year-old Billy was able to say to his father, 3-year-old Billy, the 4-year-old was the one that was taken. I apologize. So 3-year-old Billy was able to say to the father that the boogeyman had gray hairs growing on his upper lip and he was old and skinny. Which would make sense to me because
Yeah.
a 4-year-old may not know the word for mustache.
Yeah.
So, like,
That's true.
hairs growing on his lip, that's something that they might have noticed. The detective still didn't give this as much thought as he couldn't understand why anyone would kidnap a child with no means of ransom. The family didn't have enemies.
Okay.
And any childless adult who would not risk imprisonment by kidnapping when the orphanages at the time were so full. And to adopt a kid at this time was not that difficult.
Okay.
Definitely not what it is today.
Right. I mean, yeah.
So it wasn't checking out to the officers that anybody would run off with this kid.
Okay.
All right. So there was a inspector named John J. Sullivan. He was of the Missing Person Bureau, and he quoted something very interesting because I got this from the book of Deranged.
Okay.
Right. And he wrote, the kidnapper would have to be deranged. Dun, dun, dun. Like, the word was used. It just made me happy.
Oh.
That's funny.
I will. Yeah.
That was funny, and you know it.
Oh, you are ridiculous.
We should take a drink every time the word deranged is used.
Or ridiculous? Was deranged the word of the day?
Word of the day.
Last time I checked, you scream when the word of the day is said, but we'll take a
This
drink.
isn't Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Oh, okay.
I'd rather take a drink.
Okay.
I'm sure those listening probably don't want to hear me scream either. All right. What's interesting is no one put together this description of the old man with the gray mustache and the description from just a few years earlier when Francis McDonald was taken.
Okay.
I'm interested in what would have happened if people were able to put the two and two together.
I mean, record keeping was more written too.
Right.
So it wasn't accessible just to, you'd have to really dig into the cases.
Well, and people would have to remember what made the papers a few years ago.
Right. So it would be a little more tedious to.
Right. Just how do you forget that image? So at this time, the two were not put together. So within 2 weeks of the Gaffney going missing, again, the family received a ton of fake leads with their letters. One had a map drawn of an inlet in Brooklyn River where the writer had said she, or they, whomever, would find the body along with the words, "God forgive me, I didn't mean to kill him." When police went to the location of the map that was drawn of the Bronx River, all that was found was a rock jutting out of the water. So, false tip, nothing was found.
Okay.
Another letter stated that Billy's body was stuffed into a box and left into an empty apartment with the address provided. Police went to the address. They did find a box, but it was a box of rags.
Okay.
So, another poor tip. Along with tips came people claim that they saw Billy. So a ton of sightings of Billy came up. One said they saw a boy crying on the corner and was turned over to the police. The grandmother of the boy came to find him. So not the same boy.
Okay.
Another tip stated Billy was seen in an old house looking out of a window, and a man pulled him out of the window and closed the shades. The house mentioned turned out to be an
Hmm.
abandoned house with no sign that anyone had been there.
Okay.
Rumors spread that women were seen with crying boys who must be Billy. One tip was called in by a pharmacist's wife in South Dakota who claimed that Billy may be living with a family in Montana. She
Hmm.
stated that there was an elderly couple that came in one day with a child. However, in the past, they never had a kid with them when they would come
Okay.
in. Um, Also, this wife had said that the child seemed to have like somewhat of like an East Coast accent.
Okay. Somebody with an overactive imagination, most
Well, I
likely.
mean, and the thing is she actually wasn't wrong. It just wasn't Billy.
Right.
The police did go to the house in Montana, and they brought Mr. Gaffney with them, and they met the elderly couple in the house in Montana. And the elderly couple was like, "Yes, we do have a little boy." They were vacationing in New York, met a woman who said she didn't want her kid anymore.
Oh.
And again, back then things were different. You know, you're getting to the Depression era.
Yep.
People were just kind of selling their kids, unable to care for them,
Okay.
and we're just kind of giving them up. Said she didn't want her son anymore. This two elderly couple were like, well, I'll take him. And they brought him back to Montana. And so, yes, there was a boy there that they never had before with an East Coast accent.
Mm-hmm.
It just, and resembled Billy,
Okay.
just wasn't Billy. In the end, they actually said that they offered to take on the child and they grew quite a liking to him.
Okay.
So I'm glad they started to like him.
Yeah. Yeah. That usually helps.
I mean, they offered to take the child and they're like, you know, we grew to like him.
Wow. All right.
It always
That's
makes me want to go back and wonder what happened in those instances. What happened to that boy that they grew to like?
yeah.
The only solid tip, and this is going to come in kind of important later, a solid tip was provided by Anthony Barone. He was a trolley car driver. He reported that shortly after 7 p.m. on Friday, February 11th, a slender old man with a gray mustache boarded the trolley near where the Gaffneys live. The boy with blue pants and a gray shirt, which was the description of what Billy was wearing, was with this man. The child did not have a hat or coat confirmed by the family. That was something that the trolley driver took note of. We're in February, it's New York, it's cold.
Yep.
He took note that the child didn't have a hat or coat on. And he took note that the boy was crying continuously from the time they boarded to the time they got off, and the old man made many efforts to hush him. The pair rode to the end of Hamilton Avenue before they got off. Then the man asked if he could catch a ferry from there to Staten Island. And if you remember where the McDonald child died, was Staten Island. Mr. Barone reported that the man was very jumpy, and he noted that the man went the opposite way than the conductor directed him to find for the ferry.
Okay.
So he was like, hey, yeah, you go this way. And then he noticed the man went like the complete opposite direction.
Weird.
Okay. There was another man named Joseph Meehan. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
He was a motorman of the trolley, and he attested to the same story that he too saw the duo. He also noticed that the older man kept the overcoat that he was wearing wrapped around the crying boy. In the moment, he thought it was to keep him warm, but now wondering if it was to conceal him. The two trolley men were placed on a short leave from the transit company.
Okay.
And were hired to work for the police to assist in the search.
Wow. Okay.
So very interesting.
Very interesting technique.
Mm-hmm. And now the media, because they did such a splendid job in the last one. They made the sensationalized story, and to sell papers, they actually ended stories with "Come back tomorrow for daily updates in the search for Billy." They made it sound like a talk show. Like, come back tomorrow, and we'll tell you as the mystery continues.
A
And again,
real life soap opera.
yeah. And again, like in the story with Francis, mobs of enraged men and women would attack suspicious looking strangers who were in the company of children. One man was held on a $10,000 bail for kidnapping when he came across a young child of 4 years old. So this 64-year-old man asked the boy to move aside when he was trying to pass him and placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. The child's mother saw this, ran out screaming that he's trying to take her son, and the mob of neighbors beat the man until the police came to arrest him. He was eventually released, but he was still held on like $10,000 for kidnapping.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sadly, by spring, Billy's name started to disappear from the papers, letters, and tips trickled down. Mrs. Gaffney was actually taken to Bellevue Hospital with severe chest pains, lost 45 pounds, and developed a tear duct infection from all of her crying and lack of sleep.
I would imagine.
I mean, she cried to the point that her eyes had infections. She was released a few weeks after that, but the loss of her son haunted her. She absolutely refused to believe that Billy met a terrible end and that he was still alive and he was trying to get home. In 1930, just 2 years later, reporters went to the home and saw Miss Gaffney, and they saw that she had set a place at the table for Billy. It was Christmas time.
Okay.
Miss Gaffney was quoted, "There's nothing a mother can do but hope." And Miss Gaffney ended up living the rest of her life grieving for her son until the truth came out years later, and yet she refused to believe that her son had met such a tragic end. And we'll talk about her later because she comes up again. So wanted to switch over to a cute little picture of little Billy Gaffney so everybody can see him. So again, pencil image, but look at those cherub cheeks. Those little cheeks that you just make you want to, like, you know.
Okay.
Cute little boy. So poor little Billy. And he looks so innocent, you know? And it makes me sit here and wonder. He was lost in an apartment building. Presumably taken to the roof.
Yeah.
So was Albert just hanging out in the corridors of random apartment buildings looking for kids?
I mean,
that's the part that doesn't make sense to me. Later we find out that he kind of meets kids haphazardly on the streets or whatever. Was he just walking around in random apartment buildings and watching the hallways? Like, where was he?
I mean,
when these kids were playing?
This would have been a low income place, so
which he stayed in a lot. He wasn't staying in this one specifically, but he was staying nearby in a tenement housing.
But that would most likely be if he doesn't want to be found out, you're gonna go for the ones that the cops aren't gonna think you're gonna be kidnapped at that time.
But it's just weird because what was he doing while the kids were playing? Just like peeking around the corner, watching them in this random apartment building. Like it's so weird. All right, so moving on, because there's a lot more to go over, is going to be the common case, the one that most people know about if they know about Albert Fish, and that's going to be Grace Budd.
Okay.
This one's sad. So let's buckle in a little bit, okay? So May 28th of 1928, this is May, he took the Gaffney boy in February.
Right.
So we're just a few months later. The known gray man, also now known as the boogeyman, as little Billy called them, knocked on the door of the Budd family. Albert Fish was calling on the family to respond to an ad he saw in the classifieds. Edward Budd had placed an ad in the paper that appeared in the Sunday paper of May 27th that read, "Young man, 18, wishes position in the country. Edward Budd, 406 West 15th Street."
Okay.
This is not uncommon. This is something we may look at today and go, what are you doing? Are you trying to get killed? You're just throwing your address out there? This was very common in the time. It was a networking thing. You put yourself out there to find jobs, especially the city boys.
Okay.
It was incredibly common for a city boy to want to work in the country
Okay.
because all they saw were cement buildings. They were always
Right.
indoors.
Okay.
He was 18. He wanted to work and make some money for his family and himself. And he definitely wanted to be like out in the country on a farm somewhere.
Okay.
So he put that ad out there. So Albert was now 58 years old. He dressed in his best, but it was still a little shabby. His suit was navy blue with frayed jacket cuffs. Pants were worn at the knees. And when he smiled, Miss Budd, who answered the door, noticed his teeth were moldy, which gave him the look of, and I quote, kindly old rodent.
Okay.
Okay. So Albert explained that he was looking for some farm hands and came across Edward's ad. Miss Budd ushered her daughter Beatrice, who was in the adjoining room playing, to fetch Edward from his friend's apartment where he was. Albert was invited to the home and was served lemonade, and he charmed Miss Budd and provided Beatrice with 5 cents for her trouble, as he put it, to go get her brother.
Okay.
Edward came home with his friend Willie Coleman. They both came to meet Albert, and Albert provided the family with the name of Frank Howard.
Okay.
Yep.
So his alias.
Yep. Albert told the story of how he was doing well for himself in Washington, D.C., where he was born. He shared that when his eyesight started to fail, he bought a farm in Farmingdale, Long Island.
Okay.
Albert told the family his wife hated the country and ended up leaving him and his 6 children. And he was both a mother and father to his children, and life was hard during that time. He's telling the truth, kind of.
Yeah.
He was abandoned by his wife. He was being a mother and father to his 6 children.
Okay.
Definitely not on a farm, but all right. Albert claimed that he had 300 chickens on the farm and a half dozen milk cows, and he was able to hire a Swedish cook and a handful of farm hands, though one recently left the position, which led him to beginning looking for a new one. He had a Swedish cook.
Did he though?
No, okay, crazy thought, but did Jim Henson know about this story and came up with the idea of the Swedish chef for the Muppets?
Thought you didn't like the Muppets.
I'm just saying. He somehow got the Swedish chef idea from the fact that Albert Fish said that.
Okay.
It's just an idea. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Just an idea. Okay. So Edward was a tall and strapping guy for 18. Looked well enough for the job, according to Albert. He offered to pay Edward $15 a week. So Edward then asked if he could use 2 guys, as his friend Willie was looking for country work as well. Albert did agree to bring Willie, and then he told the boys to pack up and he would be back Saturday to pick them up. After he left, Edward and Willie did a little dance of celebration. They were both excited. They got their farm jobs that they wanted and handsomely well paid.
Okay.
So they were very excited about this. They felt like they were able to work out of the city and help provide for their families. The following day, Albert went to a local pawn shop and bought his 3 implements of hell. So while the boys were excited, he was preparing. When Saturday came, Edward and Willie were waiting at the Budd residence, packed and ready to go. They waited all day until a Western Union telegram was sent to the home. The handwritten telegram stated, "Been over in New Jersey, call in the morning," signed by Frank Howard. Or he really signed it as Howard, but...
Okay.
So, of course, the boys were a little let down, but they're like, hey, it's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We waited all day. What's a little bit longer?
Right.
So things happen, especially in those times when traveling was harder than just getting into your car and going.
Okay. Yeah, that's true.
All right. Now, Sunday, June 3rd, Albert made his way to the Budd residence, but stopped first to buy pot cheese and strawberries that he placed in the bucket he was carrying. He bought the bucket the day before from a street peddler. Be important later. He also stopped to buy a newspaper. The clerk noticed that Albert was carrying a bucket of food and a bundle of wrapped items.
Mm-hmm.
Wonder what those items are. And offered Albert to leave the bundle there at the stand, and then Albert can come back for it later.
Okay.
So he was just noticing this old man trying to carry all this stuff, and like, hey, why don't you leave that bundle here? You can come back for it later. Kind of help you carry everything.
Okay.
And that's what Albert did. Nobody really knowing that his bundle was his implements of hell wrapped up in a canvas. Yeah. So his 3 instruments of hell, implements of hell, were left at this newsstand while he continued on to the Budd residence. Once getting to the Budd residence, Miss Budd invited Albert in, and he provided her the bucket of cheese and strawberries, saying they were from his farm. Mr. Budd introduced himself, and Miss Budd offered Albert to stay for lunch, as Edward wasn't home yet, but would be home by noon.
Okay.
So it was about 11 a.m. at this time. Albert agreed, and the family began getting ready for lunch. Albert did apologize for his delay and stated that he was buying horses for the farm and got caught up in New Jersey for the night.
Okay.
He then asked something that Mr. Budd found slightly odd. Albert asked if Edward still had the telegram that he was sent. Mr. Budd was like, well, I think it was left on the mantle. Albert got up from the table, grabbed the telegram, and put it in his pocket. Just an odd move to make.
It is.
Mr. Budd remembered this fact later, but in the moment simply noticed it, but didn't ask anything of it. Because, like, what would you say?
Yeah, it's
like, oh yeah, your telegram is right there. Oh, click and put in your pocket.
Okay.
Like something you would notice, like, why did you want it back?
Yeah, why would you?
Right.
That's kind of an odd act, but okay.
Right. So as they were sitting and continuing to have lunch, the door opened and in walked Grace Budd. Am I boring you, sir? Nope. As you're playing with your little dragon.
I just wanted to get a reaction out of you. That's it. Okay.
All right. So as they were sitting and continuing to have lunch, the door opened and in walks little Gracie Budd, 10 years of age. Now, many who saw Grace were often struck by her prettiness and pallor. She had dark eyes, brown bobbed hair, and a big smile. She was dressed in her church outfit, which was a white silk dress and white stockings. Albert took an immediate liking to her and offered her to sit on his lap. Would you like to show little Grace? Can you show one of her pictures?
Sure. We can, yeah, we should do that.
Yeah. So we can all see what little Gracie looked like. So she was about 4 feet tall. That kind of goes through the description. Very pretty little girl.
Okay.
You want to show the other picture that kind of shows her a little bit more up close. So that bobbed hair and definitely that 1920s look.
Yeah.
Very cute little girl. Who Albert looked at, and I don't even want to know what went through his mind.
No, I don't either.
She was gorgeous. So, okay. Makes me sad to see the cute picture of her. So he offered her to sit on his lap, which she did. He asked her about school or her friends and often was stroking her hair. Now, Grace was kind of squirmy by the touch of the stranger, but was feeling reassured when her mom smiled at her. Mom also kind of said, this is Mr. Howard. He's going to be your brother's new employer, stuff like that.
Okay.
So Albert pulled out some coins and asked Grace to help him count them. Then he offered her some of the money that she counted to go buy candy for her and her sister. So he was kind of being like that grandfather thing. When she arrived back, Albert told the family, it was just like around after lunch, Edward was back. He had brought his friend Willie. They were both ready to go. So when she arrived back, lunch was over. Albert told the family that he received a letter on the night before from his sister saying that there's a birthday party on this day for his niece, and since he was in the area, he was planning to attend. Albert apologized to Edward and Willie that the trip to the farm would be a few hours more and provided them with $2 to go see a movie while they waited. Before he left, he asked if maybe Grace would like to go with him, since there would be other kids at this party. Now, Miss Budd was a little apprehensive at the idea, but she didn't want to offend Mr. Howard as
Gotcha.
Edward's new employer, stuff like that. And because he was being so kind to them, gave them the cheese and strawberries, gave the kids money for candy. So she was apprehensive. But Mr. Budd, who sensed her apprehension, kind of said, "Let the girl go. She never really ever gets to do anything fun."
Okay.
So Miss Budd did agree and told Grace that she can change and get ready to attend the party with Mr. Howard. Miss Budd asked where the party would be, and Albert quickly gave the address of 137th Street and Columbus Avenue. What the Budds didn't know at this time was that Columbus Street ends at 110th Street. So Grace wore a spring coat with fur trim collar and cuff. A fake pink rose was pinned on her lapel. She wore a gray hat with blue streamers and had a brown leather bag in her hand and a string of fake pearls around her neck, her mother saying it was her favorite necklace.
Okay.
Mr. Budd or Miss Budd watched her daughter walk away hand in hand with Mr. Howard, and that was the last time she ever saw her daughter. So as Albert and Grace walked, Albert stopped at the newsstand to collect his bundle, which was the butcher knife, handsaw, and meat cleaver, his implements of hell.
Oh.
Later that night, when Grace didn't come back from the party, as promised by 9 p.m., they sent Edward to the police station to make a report. Lieutenant Daniel Dribbin and detectives Jerry Mayer and James McGee and James Murphy arrived at the home where the Budds told them of this Mr. Howard, the party, the job for Ed, and the farm. As the investigation started, the police retrieved a copy of the Western Union Telegram, which haunted Mr. Budd, knowing that it was odd that Albert took the telegram from the mantle. But luckily there was a copy of it.
Mm-hmm.
But still, just the idea and him watching him do that, and now his daughter's gone.
Yep.
That just sealed the deal, like he was trying to erase his presence from the home. So by June 5th, Grace's name and photo was in the paper and a search was underway. Again, parties were looking in the alleyways, the warehouses, empty lots, movie theaters, subways, garages. No trace was found of Grace. Officers went to the area of the farm and saw nothing of the sort was there. Obviously, fake farm.
Yep.
Then suddenly women from around town started calling in that they've seen an old thin gray man around the neighborhood around this time.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at kids as if he was like sizing them up. Leads are very typical in kidnapping cases, but detectives were serious about every tip and lead that they received. On another side, when Grace left with Albert, she walked past other kids who were playing and saw Grace walking with him. The children were Loretta, Jimmy, George, and Phil. They all stated that they saw Grace and the man walk past them, and when they reached the corner, they saw Grace and the man get into a car that seemed to be waiting for them. They said the car was a blue sedan with yellow Pennsylvania license plate, and it sped away. And the kids all said that the driver was young and had a straw hat, and he was behind the wheel. Another witness, who was a teenager that worked on the candy store on that same corner, attested to that statement.
Okay.
So we have Albert walking away with this kid. These other kids said, well, but we saw them both get into a car.
Right.
Was there an accomplice in any of the stuff that Albert did? It's nothing we'll ever know because it was never confessed to or talked about.
Right.
But it does make you wonder if he ever had an accomplice.
Possibly.
So as the story progresses, more stories came out, such as one from Miss DeMille, who stated that on Sunday, June 3rd, Around 6:30 p.m., she went inside the home to fix dinner and left her son, 4 years old, to ride his tricycle up and down the block. When she looked out the window, she saw an elderly man with an elderly woman and a teenage boy leading her son away from the home with the tricycle in the hand. So the elderly man was holding her son's hand while that younger one was carrying the trike. She ran out of the home, caught up to them, and grabbed her son. The man tried to explain that they were just taking him to buy a new bell for his bike. Miss DeMille recalled saying, like, it's Sunday night. Where did you expect to find an open store that sells a bike bell? And with that, the couple and the teenager simply just walked away. Miss DeMille reported this happened on Wednesday, June 6th, and was worried that she was in the presence of the man who took Grace, as the descriptions matched.
Right.
The questions about this is that we don't know if Albert really had other people he worked with. So again, it's like, was there accomplices? Now we're talking about this elderly woman.
Yeah.
We don't know. And it would be hard for him to do that because this was the same day that he took Grace. Now, he left the house at about 4 p.m. with Grace and took her.
Okay.
Would he be back in the area on that same night around 6:30 p.m. and try taking another kid with an elderly woman and a teenage boy? Like, we don't...
It doesn't sound like he would have.
It doesn't sound like there was enough time.
And I don't know that he would be really working with anybody.
Right. But this did leave detectives to question if they had maybe a group of professional child snatchers in the area.
Oh. That could just be a different incident.
Right.
Different people.
So as with the Gaffneys, unfortunately, the Budds began to get many of the same type of trolling type letters, with one saying, "My dear Mr. and Mrs. Budd, your child is going to a funeral. I still got her. Howard." And like before, dozens of sightings and tips came in, including moms going after elderly men out with their grandchildren.
Okay.
Which is sucky.
Well, I mean,
don't be an old man at the time and be hanging out with your grandkids. You're going to get beat up.
When you hear of a situation like that, I'm sure the neighborhood and that they were extra vigilant then because they were fearful for their children and as well. And some of the descriptions are vague, so they're gonna...
Sure.
There's a lot of mistaken identity then.
Right. And unfortunately, that would mean innocent old men were getting beat up for hanging out with their grandkids.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the idea that you want to have happen.
No.
All right. However, with this case, police work had seemed to improve. The detectives were able to trace the Western Union Telegraph back to the office on 3rd Ave and 103rd Street in Manhattan. By this, they were able to investigate the area and found the peddler who sold Albert the pot he carried the cheese and strawberries in. So going backwards, police work got a little bit better. He had bought that bucket that he carried the cheese and strawberries to give to them.
Yep.
He bought that bucket from a street peddler. The peddler was Ruben Rosoff, and he was able to provide a description and led the detectives to know that this Mr. Howard lived in the area of East Harlem.
Okay.
The description of the car was sent to Pennsylvania, but like New York City, the police were unable to find such vehicle. On June 14th, another letter was sent to the Budd family that provided hope, but then again, it was another hoax. So this letter. All right. This letter is also kind of sad. All right. I have Grace. She is safe and sound. She's happy in her new home and not at all homesick. I will see to it that Grace has a proper schooling. She's been given an Angora cat and a pet canary. She calls the canary Bill. I am a keen student of human nature. That's why I was attracted to Grace. She seemed like a girl who would appreciate nice surroundings and a really nice home. I drove with Grace past your house in an automobile several days ago. I saw several persons standing in front of the house and did not stop as it looked like they were waiting for me. I will see to it in the near future that for some arrangements to be made so Grace will be able to visit you for a short time. The letter was struck some of the detectives as it was authentic, and it was signed JFH.
Okay.
Okay. So before the end of June, Grace, like Billy, began to disappear from the paper, which actually was pretty sad because she began to disappear from the paper in June. She was taken in May. So it didn't last as long, unfortunately.
Mm.
So I'm closing my eyes right now because they just started like burning for some reason. So ignore the fact that I'm closing my eyes. I'm still just randomly talking. Okay, eyes open. All right. Other news about other things took over the newspapers, such as at this time Amelia Earhart was crossing the Atlantic. Then there was the death of pilot Captain Emilio Carzana. Leah can't talk today because I had too much gin, apparently. Emilio Carazana.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yes.
Close enough.
His plane was actually struck by lightning.
Oh, that's it's an very interesting
Yeah.
occurrence.
So a lot of things were happening globally, and therefore Grace's name just was lowered and lowered, and then she was totally out of the papers by July.
Okay.
That also makes me sad because it makes me wonder if they were getting so used to the fact that kidnappings were happening that they weren't making the news for as long.
It also might have been a challenge to even investigate those, especially in this case. There wasn't a ransom note or anything like that.
Right, no leads.
There were no leads. There was a note from, and they thought was authentic, but no leads or demand of money or
Right.
anything like that. So it wasn't like they were just trying to take advantage of or trying to get by.
Right.
Like,
so this, now we're going to get kind of weird. All right.
okay.
All right. So in August, the police thought they may have found their guy. So a warden from Florida who was reading, probably can you hear that on the recording because I just hit that. Okay. So he thought that he recognized the picture or the description and called the authorities and said that this Howard guy could be a prisoner or a former prisoner from his jail named Albert E. Corthell. All right, so he was spending time in prisons due to forgery, swindling, and car theft. He was known to use young girls and pose them as his daughter when pulling his scams. Therefore, the descriptions matched, and the use of a young girl was his normal. So police were like, this may be our guy then.
Okay. Right, that would line up or could.
So PD thought there was a connection there. The more detectives thought about it, the more they began to suspect that Corthell and Howard were the same guy. So the Buds were brought to the station to look at a photo of Corthell because there was obviously mugshots of him. Mr. Budd thought he looked like Howard but wasn't sure. Edward felt the same, but Mrs. Budd was ready to swear that this was Howard. So arrest warrants were made for this Corthell man. They were unable to find him, and 2 years passed. And now there's a new detective on the case named William F. King, who was a member of the Missing Persons Bureau. And he chased down any lead covering thousands of miles across the U.S. Trying to find this Corthell guy. In June of 1930, Detective King was headed to Florida, where a woman reported her husband had conned her, and he could be the wanted Corthell, who was going by the name of Charles Howard. The woman reported that she married a man she met while she was vacationing in New York City, and they both traveled back to Florida, where Corthell was known to do many of his crimes. And after moving into the woman's aunt's apartment, Charles Howard left with $2,800 of her cash and $1,000 of her aunt's cash.
That was a lot of money back then.
It was, right. Charles Howard was okay, so Charles Howard, her husband, who could be Corthell, who could be Frank Howard, who could be Albert Fish. Okay. All right. So
Oh, jeez. Okay.
he was actually found very fast. Like King had no problem finding this guy in Florida.
Okay.
He had actually extradited this man back to New York City.
Okay.
And interrogated him and eventually found out that this man, Charles Howard, was in fact Charles Howard, not Corthell, not Frank Howard, just Charles Howard.
Just Charles
Howard. However, again, Miss Budd was brought into the station, and this time Willie, who was now about 20 years old, came with. Willie was not sure if this was Frank Howard, but Miss Budd was less doubtful, saying this was the man who took her daughter. Okay.
An eyewitness statement that goes wrong.
Right. So Charles Howard ended up having a airtight alibi and was not even in the state and living in a different part of the country when the kidnapping occurred. So Charles Howard was not it.
Of course. But
however, he was arrested for grand larceny because he did steal that money. Anyway, so something came out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Another development, and this one actually makes me very sad. Okay, so in September of 1930, a woman by the name of Jessie Pope came forward and said she thinks that her 66-year-old husband, Charles Edward Pope, was the kidnapper. So Jessie said at the time of the kidnapping, Jessie stated that her and Charles were separated at the time and she was living in New Jersey. On the day Grace was kidnapped, Jessie received a Western Union message from her husband who asked her to meet him on the corner of High and Smith Street. Jessie thought this was odd, but she went to the corner and found her husband there with a child. The child was dressed up in her Sunday outfit, brown hair, sweet face. Charles asked her if she can watch the child for a few days while he took care of some business. Don't ask questions. That type of thing. Just
because that's never suspect.
Right.
Like, don't ask questions.
Don't ask questions. Just, can you watch this kid for a little bit? Kid that she's never seen him with before.
Okay.
He said that the child was a daughter of a friend and she would be doing him a great favor. She stated she wanted no part of whatever he was up to. And he then had a little bit of a fit and was like, I guess I'll just have to take the child home with me type thing. Jessie said as they left, the child looked at her and she would never forget the look on the child's face. I'm going to come back to that. Anyway, yet Jessie said that shortly after this, she became very ill and the news of Grace had died down. Therefore, she completely forgot about this incident.
Sure.
Even though she just said she would never forget the look on this girl's face, she completely forgot that this whole thing happened and didn't report it till 2 years later.
Okay. That's, yeah. Does not make sense.
Right. Okay. After reading about the Charles Howard incident where they thought that they had captured the person that they were looking for, she read about the Charles Howard incident and memory all of a sudden came back to her. And she was so sure of this that she even went to the Budd's residence to tell them about this. And Mrs. Budd showed her a photo of Grace, and she swore that this was the same child she absolutely saw.
Because her
2-year memory.
Because her memory is so reliable.
Right. So
she's very influenced when it comes to saying, yep, that's the person. No, that's the person.
So Charles Pope was arrested for kidnapping. And Miss Budd again was escorted to the station for a lineup, and she once again, for a third time, confirmed that this was the man.
How many times can you get it wrong and still be believed?
Right. Understood. No, I mean, and I get it at the same time. She just wants to find her daughter.
Yeah.
She's just so desperate to find her daughter that a lot of these innocent people were being misidentified by her. She just became a very unreliable witness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Charles continued to try to proclaim his innocence. Jessie reported to the police that Charles was a dangerous man and she had to have him committed at one time. Charles admitted that he was a resident at a mental health facility. However, this was due because his wife was trying to get money that he was left from his late father, and she had him committed.
Yeah, that was common practice.
Usually for women, though.
Men did it to women.
Right, but not usually the other way around.
Well, I mean, it can go both ways.
So he inherited $30,000 from his father's estate and was described by his sister as soft-hearted and hardworking man who was in a bad marriage to a woman who wanted his money. So Detective King discovered that Charles' story checks out.
Oh.
And he has no police record. King did learn, however, that Charles owned an old farmhouse in Shandaken, New York. Shandaken, New York.
Yeah.
Sorry to the New Yorkers who are yelling at me right now for butchering that. Their detectives found trunks in the shed of the farm of this house.
Okay.
So they ransacked the farm, found absolutely nothing, but they saw these trunks in the shed. Mostly the trunks held nothing noteworthy. However, they did, in one trunk, find strands of deep brown hair tied with a white ribbon. And then it was concluded that the hair looked to have been clipped from a young girl.
Okay.
They also found white stockings with darned heels, similar to what Grace was wearing the day she was taken.
Okay.
So investigators learned that Grace was actually in the area of this farmhouse during the summer of 1927, a year before she was taken.
Okay.
And this was when she was sent to live with a local family under the sponsorship of the New York Tribune's Fresh Air Fund. So at this time, they actually had people who would sponsor these kids from the city to come live in the country area for a week or two or whatever.
Right.
So, and there was for the kids, underprivileged kids.
Okay.
So she was in this area for part of the summer. They kind of took that as ties her to him in some way, shape, or form. Maybe he saw her, started following her for a year.
Okay.
Then you have her mom testimony saying that that's definitely him. It looks just like him. And then you find some hair and white stockings hidden in a trunk.
Okay.
That's a lot of good evidence there, right?
A lot of circumstantial, but okay. No body? No body. Circumstantial, but okay.
Now, funny enough, under questioning from the defense attorney, Jessie finally admitted that she had Charles committed for money and stated that the description of the girl she saw was fabricated to make it seem like it was Grace. Mrs. Budd was questioned, and she eventually said that when Jessie came to see her, she made such a deal and description of Charles, it was hard to not recognize him. Charles was able to explain the hair, which was a locket from his son that he kept as a keepsake, and the stockings were old clothing he kept from his children to give to his grandchildren.
Okay, I mean, that was a practice.
Everything plausible, right?
Yeah, that was a practice back then.
I mean, I don't.
Now it's kind of creepy to keep somebody's hair, but okay.
I think I still have a little clipping from my daughter's first haircut. I'm pretty sure there's one in her baby book.
Okay, well, but
So despite all of this, Magistrate George De Luca felt there was still enough evidence against Charles, after all of this, to hold him in jail on a $25,000 bond, which Charles could not afford. He was then indicted by the grand jury for the kidnapping of Grace Budd, and a trial was set to begin. Okay. During the trial, people forgot about the original suspect, the one that we were talking about, Corthell.
Mm-hmm.
Detective King, who was becoming more and more doubtful that Charles Pope's guilt, continued searching for him.
Okay.
2 weeks before Charles's trial, King found his man,
Oh,
Corthell, who was going under the name of J.W. West and was arrested in Missouri when he tried to cash a certified check made out for $15,000 that was made out to the treasurer of the Park Board of Joliet, Wisconsin, or Illinois. So he was trying to do a scam, got arrested. They found him.
okay.
He was sent to New York, where Miss Budd also positively identified him.
Okay,
That's
question.
number 4.
Question.
Yeah.
Which one is it? So you have one in custody that she's identified and one not in custody that she's or you know what I mean?
Right.
One that isn't in custody for that offense, but just was stupid and got caught.
Yeah.
But she says that's the person. So now which one is it? Or is it both of them?
Yeah. Okay.
Like it sounds like she just feels
Terrible witness.
feels so bad, and everybody the police present to her, she trusts that that's the person.
Right. Yeah.
Or all these people look exactly the same, and there are, yeah.
There are a lot of Albert Fish lookalikes out there, apparently.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. So now, when they had nobody to look for, now the police had 2 suspects in custody, both positively identified.
That right there should, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
The trial for Charles lasted a very short time. Miss Budd retracted her identification of Charles. Jessie attempted to continue her line of accusations, but was discredited for attempts for his money, and Judge William Allen directed the jury to find the defendant not guilty.
So she took her identification back when
Yeah.
she identified somebody else.
Right.
Okay.
After a long 3.5 months in prison, Charles was set free. He had to have hated his wife after this.
Yeah.
Like, there had been so much hate,
Yeah.
and she deserved it.
Oh, yeah.
100%. All right.
Maybe she's the one that should have been committed.
For real. For doing something like that. I hope she was charged. Like, there had to be something coming out of this.
Probably not.
You can't just do that to somebody. But you're right, probably not. All right, so while Corthell was in custody, he denied knowing anything about the kidnapping. Police made every effort to connect Corthell to the crime, but there was not even a shred of evidence. And after Miss Budd felt embarrassed for her previous false identifications, she chose not to identify Corthell anymore. The judge made the decision that they would have to let Corthell go due to the fact they were not able to tie him to the kidnapping, and evidence did not exist. And once again, the detectives were back to where they were 2 years prior. Nobody. While Charles Pope's trial was going on, Albert was actually committed to Bellevue Hospital for a 10-day observation after an arrest of sending, once again, his obscene letters in the mail. In fact, the letters were quoted to be a letter of such vile, obscene, and filthy nature that to set forth the contents thereof would defile the records of the court. Which makes me really want to read that.
I bet you could find them somewhere.
I don't know. And they did not release whatever letters these were.
Well, technology is a lot better now. You never know.
Like, it makes me go like, oh my God, what did it say? I want to read it now. In the summer of 1928, after Grace was murdered, Albert was arrested for larceny 3 times in a span of 6 weeks. He then avoided all contact with police as much as possible, but as put it, he was the subject to his demons beyond his control. Beyond his many crimes was the habitual and compulsive writer of obscene letters.
Okay.
By spring of 1929, Albert was writing furies of letters of obscene nature from ads that he found in classifieds, matrimonial agencies, and other sources that he can find. Albert started to present himself as the Hollywood producer and ready to offer large sums of money to perform lewd acts on himself and sometimes a disabled son named Bobby. An example of such letter is going to be read now. I'm going to turn to the page of that because this was a crazy letter.
Okay.
It's going to make you just love me after this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Give you good dreams tonight?
Oh, yeah.
All right. I wish you could see me now, Fish wrote in his passage. I'm sitting in a chair naked. The pain is across my back, just over my behind. When you strip me naked, you will see the most perfect form. Yours, your sweet honey of my heart. I can taste your sweet piss, your sweet shit. You must pee in a glass, and I shall drink every drop of it as you watch me. Tell me when you want to do number 2. I will take you over my knee, pull up your clothes, take down your drawers, and hold my mouth to your sweet honey fat ass and eat your sweet peanut butter as it comes out fresh and hot. That's how they do it in Hollywood.
Alrighty then.
I don't think Nick wants to be my friend anymore.
Alrighty then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
All right. A letter was sent to a professional housekeeper. She turned it over to the police, who were able to track it back to Albert, and he was arrested. And after an exam by a social worker, he was placed back to Bellevue Hospital for the mental status of questionable. The psychiatrist met with Albert, but in the end simply stated that Albert was suffering from some sort of sexual psychopathy.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would... Okay.
They also said such conduct as those letters are often the result of senile dementia and observed in men of advanced stages. But in this particular case, we believe it's not the same significance for the reason that this man, according to the history in our examination, has manifested sex perversion from early life. In the end, Dr. Gregory wrote, though Fish might be a sexual pervert, he shows no signs of mental deterioration or dementia. As a result of our psychiatric examination, we are of the opinion that this man, at the present time, is not insane.
Okay. Right.
Albert went on to stay there for another 30 days and was released to his daughter on January 16th and was again on the loose.
Yeah.
By 1934, Albert was living with his son, Albert Jr. Continued his letters and odd behaviors that Jr. got used to and learned best is not to say or ask anything. This included the time that he walked in on Albert masturbating in his bedroom. So he just gets home from work, hears something in his bedroom, walks into his bedroom, sees his dad completely naked, masturbating and slapping himself with a board of nails.
Alrighty then.
Yeah. After weeks in Bellevue, once again, Albert found himself back in trouble with the law and continued to stay in Bellevue. This time, officers had to search Albert's room and found his cat of nine tails, his board and nails, as well as a frankfurter and carrots.
Alrighty then.
Do you want to know what those frankfurter and carrots were used for?
Not really.
Albert put it very, very point of view, very bluntly.
I'm good.
He shoved them up his ass. He had no shame. He straight out said what he did with them.
I don't think I can ever eat carrots or a hot dog again.
Yeah. After this, Albert then went to stay at the Kings County Hospital. This time his meeting with a psychiatrist was short. He was not asked about the boards, the whips, or the carrots. They didn't ask him about any of that.
So they asked him about the frankfurters, though.
No, not that either.
Okay.
No. They just stayed away from all of that. And I sit and wonder why, but at the same time, there are people that do this. And does it mean that you're psychologically gross or something? I mean, people, unfortunately, in kinky sex play with food. You know what? My parents might hear all this. I'm going to stop talking right about there. Okay. Anyway. Sorry, Dad, if you're hearing this. All right, moving on.
All right.
All right, so he was sent back home, and for a long time, actually seemed normal, according to his son, until he just wasn't anymore. he was normal, and then he just like back to his old weird self.
Okay.
So now he noticed that Albert, his dad, began a liking to raw meat.
Okay.
Okay, that wasn't a thing before, but it started becoming a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he noticed that his dad was having terrifying night terrors, often screaming in his sleep. And when Albert Jr. would go wake his dad up, he would find him in a cold sweat and completely terrified.
Oh.
Since the release of Corthell, there was not a single plausible suspect. The only person left in the Missing Persons Bureau that felt anything could be found was Detective King, who continued to pursue this case for 6 years since Grace disappeared.
Right.
Then came a break again, this time proving valuable. On a late autumn day of November 11th, Mrs. Budd received a letter. She was unable to read the letter, therefore her son Edward picked up the letter and read it. What he read sent him immediately to the police. So the Albert or the Miss Budd letter, which becomes very popular. I'm going to drink a little water here before I say it.
Okay.
Okay. Breathing deeply. This was sent to the mother. My dear Mrs. Budd. My dear Mrs. Budd. You can go fuck all the way off, sir. Anyway. My dear Mrs. Budd. In 1894, a friend of mine shipped as a deckhand on the steamer Tacoma, Captain John Davis. They sailed from San Francisco to Hong Kong, China. On arriving there, he and 2 others went ashore and got drunk. They returned and the boat was gone. At the time, there was a famine in China. Meat of any kind was from $1 to $3 a pound. So great was the suffering among the poor that all children under 12 were sold to the butchers to be cut up and sold for food in order to keep others from starving. A boy or girl under 14 was not safe in the street. You can go in any shop and ask for a steak chops or stew meat. Part of a naked body of a boy or girl will be brought out and just what you wanted cut from it. A boy's or girl's behind was the sweetest part of the body and sold as a veal cutlet bought for the highest price. John stated there so long as he acquired the taste for human flesh. On his return to New York, he stole 2 boys, one 7, one 11. He took them to his home, stripped them naked, tied them in a closet, then burned everything they had on. Several times every day and every night he spanked them, tortured them to make their meat good and tender. First, he killed the 11-year-old boy because he had the fattest ass and, of course, the most meat on it. Every part of his body was cooked and eaten except for the head, bones, and guts. He was roasted in the oven, all of his ass, broiled, boiled, fried, stewed. The little boy was next, went the same way. At the time, I was living on 409 East 100th Street, near the right side. He told me so often how good human flesh was that I made up my mind to taste it. On Sunday, June 3rd, 1928, I called on you. Pardon me, because my eyes are burning again. This kind of happens to me like every night, and I just have to like close my eyes for a few seconds. Probably need some eye drops eventually, but so break time for just a moment. Okay. I called on you at 406 West 15th Street, brought you pot cheese, strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat on my lap, kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her. On the pretense of taking her to a party, you said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all of my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on them. When she was ready, having trouble seeing again, just a second. When she was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in a closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run down the stairs. I grabbed her and stated, I will tell my mama. I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite, and scratch. I choked her to death. Then cut her in small pieces so I could take my meat to my room, cook, and eat it. How sweet and tender her little ass was roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not, pardon my French, I did not fuck her, though I could have, had I wished. She died a virgin.
Hmm.
Woo! So, that was a crazy letter.
Yeah.
So, if you don't mind me, I am going to wipe my eyes because boy, did they start burning out of nowhere. So I apologize. Little break. All right, so
No. Hmm.
my eyes are probably like beet red now. All right, so yes. How would you like that letter?
That does not sound fun.
Right? All right. The letter was horrific to the family, but provided noteworthy. Detective King immediately knew this was real. The knowledge of the cheese and strawberries was not known to the general public. Only the kidnapper would be able to note this, as well as speaking about the lunch they shared with the family. King dug through his pile to find the copy of the telegram Albert sent to the family all those years ago, and sure enough, the handwriting matched. It wasn't the letter itself that caused Albert to finally got caught. It was the envelope. The envelope had a return address printed as NYPCBA. Albert did scribble a pen over the address part, but left the city open to read New York. Nor did he attempt to cover the emblem of the business. With a magnifying glass, Detective King was able to see the address, though through the pen, leading him to the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. He went there and introduced himself to a man named Arthur Ennis, who was able to state that there was no record of an employee named Frank Howard. But King didn't stop there. He then asked to see all the employees' personnel forms, including retired employees, and painstakingly went over almost 400 forms, checking the handwriting and comparing. The following day, after not being able to come up with a match, Detective King returned and asked to hold a meeting with all the members. The same day, an emergency meeting was called, and Detective King explained the case to all the members in hopes that someone remembers the man that he's searching for, or if they can state they have ever taken stationery and envelopes from the office. It was here that one employee did admit to taking the stationery and envelopes, but he did not write the letter. The man explained that he took him back to his rooming house where he rented a room at 200 East 52nd Street, room 7. The man stated that he moved out of the house some time ago, but he did leave the remaining stationery and envelopes in the room when he left.
Okay.
Okay. This detective is amazing, by the way. 400 personnel files he went through just comparing handwriting.
Mm-hmm.
He was not stopping. King went to the rooming house and asked if there was a Frank Howard that lived there. The landlady, Frida Schneider, who stated there was not. King then showed her a detailed description of Frank, and she immediately recognized him. Schneider stated that an older man with that description did stay in room 7 for 2 months and just left on November 11th, the day the letter arrived to Miss Budd. Schneider did not know where he went or was able to give much information about him, but was able to show the register where the signature of not Frank Howard, but Albert Fish was. And this signature matched the handwriting of the telegram and the letter. So now Frank Howard actually has a name, Albert Fish. All right, so now the detectives got stuff.
Okay.
Schneider stated that Albert was partially supported by his son, who mailed a $25 check to him monthly. Albert told Schneider that he's expecting a check for November, and once it arrives, he'll come to collect it. King was excited to know that he was finally able to get his guy, and he had a stakeout set up around the building. It was a few weeks, and no Albert Fish showed up.
Okay.
So he started thinking, did Fish come around and start seeing the cops kind of around the area and decide not to come? So what he did is he pulled his guys back and said, we're still going to be around the area, but we're not going to be like right here.
Okay.
And Miss Schneider promised that if Albert were to come into the building to look for this check, she would absolutely call him.
Okay.
Finally, December 13th, when King was pretty much losing hope that Fish was going to arrive there.
Yeah.
He was sitting at work one day, and Miss Schneider called him. She said Albert was there in her building and was asking about his check. King was like, stall him. Like, stall him. Get naked and just dance in front of him. Something. I'm just kidding. He didn't say that. But
Oh, okay.
Stall him. Do not let him leave that building. And I would be right there. So he raced to the building. He got there. Miss Schneider was like, all right, he's here. He's in that room. King arrived, went into the room, and there sitting at a wooden table, sipping from a teacup, was Albert Fish. King walked in, closed the door behind him, and said, Albert Fish? Albert rose to his feet and nodded. Somehow got the impression that something was going down. Albert slowly went into his pocket of his vest and pulled out a razor and like held it in front of him. All right, King walked up to him, took this little man's wrist, flicked it, and the razor fell out of the hand. And like a bomb-ass detective, straight out said, I've got you now. Isn't that perfect?
Yeah.
Like, I got you now. Like, oh my God. Bomb arrest.
Yeah.
That was a bomb arrest. After taking Albert into custody, King began to question him. He stated that he did write the letter. He also said that he wrote the telegram 6 years ago.
Okay.
Albert confirmed all of this. But when King asked if he was responsible for taking Grace, this is where Albert wanted to play some games and was like, no, he didn't kidnap anyone. Albert denied that he was ever even at the Bud House. King was like, no, I've been looking for you for 6 years. I'm frustrated. I'm not playing this game. He's like, all right, cool. You know what? You're going to play this game. I'm going to play too. I'm going to go get the manager of the Western Union office, then grab the Costa family who owned the resident building that you lived in 1928. Then get Reuben Rosoff, the peddler you bought the bucket from that carried the pot cheese and the strawberries to the Bud House, and then bring the Bud family and William Corman all to identify you. Okay?
Okay.
BRB. I'm going to go. I'll be right back. King headed to the door, but Albert was like, hold on a sec. Jig's up. He knows. Don't go through all of that. I'm the man you want. I took Grace Budd from her house on the 3rd day of June and brought her to Westchester and killed her that same afternoon.
Okay.
So, again, bomb-ass detective, like, I'm going to bring everybody who knows you and just identify you because we're not playing this game.
Okay.
Albert admitted that Grace was not his target. He had meant to murder her brother Edward, and when he spotted Edward's ad in the paper, he was planning to lure Edward to an abandoned house in Westchester in the community of Worthington, where he once lived years back. He was going to overpower Edward, bind him with cords, and slice off his penis. Then he was going to take a train back to the city, leave town, and leave Edward to die from loss of blood. The first time meeting Edward, he was disappointed because Edward looked more like a full-grown adult, and then the complication of adding another strong-looking man, Willie. Albert said he was hesitant, but still felt he can overpower them. Some old man trying to overpower 2 18-year-old sturdly guys. All right.
Yeah, okay.
All right, cool, dude. Cool story. He felt like he could overpower him as his bloodlust and compulsion was too strong for him to turn them away. Albert described his plans by buying the bucket, the tools he needed, how he bought the food items. He was able to leave his canvas wrap bundle and his tools at the newspaper stand. He described having lunch with the family and finally seeing Grace for their first time. He knew then it was the girl he wanted and not the boys. Albert explained the quick idea to change his plans, saying he was going to go to a party and attempt to get Grace out of the home. Albert went on to explain the actual death. He took Grace to the train station where he bought a round-trip ticket for himself and a one-way ticket for Grace. That's just so sad.
Yeah.
He watched Grace enjoy looking out of the window and talking about the fun party, all while his tools sat next to him. Upon leaving the train, Grace noticed that he left his bundle of tools on the train. She told him, "Hey, you forgot your tool or you forgot your bundle," ran back on the train, grabbed the bundle, and handed it to Albert. She took the tools that killed her and handed it to her killer. Oh, okay. Anyway. They walked to the old two-story home known as Wisteria Cottage, which was set back a few dozen feet from the road and a small slope. It was surrounded by dense woods with a small wooded privy in the back of the home. He told Grace to play outside as she began to pick wildflowers growing in the front lawn, while Albert went to the second-story bedroom of the home, stripped naked. He then called Grace to come upstairs and hid in a closet. When she got there, he stepped out from the closet, and when she saw him naked, she screamed and tried to run, saying, "I'll tell Mama." Albert grabbed Grace by the neck, pulled her back into the room that she was running from, dragged her onto a laid-out tarp, knelt on her chest with all of his weight, and continued to choke her. When she died, he lifted her head and rested it on the rim of a bucket, and with his knife, cut off Grace's head, and the bucket caught the blood. Albert once again said he did not defile her sexually, and she died a virgin. Albert continued to undress the body, opened the window, dumped the blood out of it. He knelt beside the body, using his tools, began to slice through her midsection just below the navel. Once the body was in two, he took her head and brought it down to the privy. He thought about putting it into the hole of the privy, but felt it was wrong to put it in a mess. Because what you just did was right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway. Therefore, he placed it on a wooden corner and covered it with newspapers and placed her shoes along the ledge just below the opening of the privy hole. Upstairs, he placed the two body parts in the corner and opened the closet door to hide it. Albert went to the back again, began to scrub his bloody hands with fistfuls of grass, since the home did not have any running water. After this, Albert dressed and went back home, arriving home around 6:30 p.m. Albert reported he came back to the house 4 days later. He tossed the lower part of the body out of the window because the legs were stiff. He then carried the top half out to the back, retrieved the lower half, and laid the body parts behind the stone wall that was behind the home, and did the same with the head, so she was laid on the ground with all body parts together. Albert retrieved his tools from the house and tossed them over the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Albert reported that he went back to the home several times with his son Albert Jr., but never went back to see the body, just left it on the top of the ground. When asked why he did this, Albert replied, I could never account for it. Later that same night, Albert led police to the home and the final resting place of Grace, and it was there her body was in fact found. Edward and Mr. Budd, Edward and Mr. Budd were brought to the station the following day after the body was discovered. Edward walked into the room Albert was in to identify him. Upon entering, Edward looked at the man and yelled, "It's him," and lunged at Albert, screaming, "You dirty old bastard, you son of a bitch," and took several officers to pull Edward away. Then Mr. Budd entered the room. He stood in the doorway and walked right up to Albert and stood before him. Mr. Budd asked, "Do you know me?" And Albert replied, "Yes, you're Mr. Budd." Mr. Budd then said, "And you're the man who came into my home as a guest and took my little girl away." And with that, Mr. Budd began to cry and was ushered out by Detective King. Albert Jr., living in Queens, New York, was told of the arrest and the charges of his father. His reply was that old skunk. I always knew something like this would happen sooner or later. He described to reporters the odd behaviors he saw over his lifetime with his father and the increasingly terror-filled nightmares he had. When he asked who the child was, he was told the child was Grace Budd. Albert Jr. then turned pale and said, "My God, that was the name he used to scream out in his sleep."
Hmm.
So with that is episode 2. We're going to stop there because this got really heavy.
And we're at an hour and a half.
And we're at an hour and a half. Like both episodes were going to be about an hour and a half. But
Okay.
that's why we have to stop because this is going to be like 3 hours long if I kept going.
Yep.
But what's really catching me as well
Mm-hmm.
is at the very end, Albert Jr. had said, "My God, that was the name he used to scream in his sleep,"
Mm-hmm.
which makes me just go, Grace was haunting the fuck out of Albert Fish.
Yeah.
Good. Like, freaking good. That should have happened. I'm glad that she did.
Okay.
I hope Albert felt terrible. Anyway. So we're going to stop here because we have a lot more to cover. We're going to discuss his trial and eventual execution and just some of the craziness that happened after this, because there's more things that come out during the trial of the things that Albert did. And we're going to discuss a little bit the difference between being legally insane and clinically insane. Because there's a lot of question as to why was he deemed not insane. Like the things that he did was crazy.
Yeah.
But how come he was deemed sane for his trial then? We'll discuss a little bit about that difference and why that was.
Okay.
So, do you hate me yet?
No, not yet. Not yet.
Are you feeling a little uncomfortable?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Okay.
I think we need a break.
Okay. Definitely heavy material there.
Yeah.
No, I was not crying when I was reading the letter, but man, at night my eyes just really start to burn and I was having trouble reading. So I apologize. But
all right. Well,
that was a good time.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Do you need another drink?
Yeah, later on we will have to have another drink.
Yeah. That was a lot. It's very heavy. It's a heavy topic. So thanks everybody for sticking in there with me.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be recording part 3 in the next few days here, and then that will be out, and then we're going to be entering season 3. So This was fun.
Thank you for joining us, and like and subscribe to the channel for any updates.
That's right.
And hope you join us next time.
Good night.